Personally, I think everybody could benefit from the home visiting programs.
I think that as a parent now, I'm grateful for support more than I was before.
I filled out that form not knowing what I was doing. I am very, very grateful that I did it because it's really helping me a lot.
Bueno, creo que por mi parte esperaba algo totalmente diferente, como un programa más frío, por decir algo, no tan cercano a la familia. Y a través del programa nos hemos dado cuenta que también pasa a ser una familia con nosotros porque nos apoya en los momentos difíciles o cuando nos hemos visto en dificultades.
Well, I was a new mom and I had no experience taking care of a newborn.
There isn't like a book on how to raise a kid.
We come from like a lot of family history of, drugs, violence, alcoholism, so we didn't want our daughter to experience any of that.
The thought that a parent was supposed to be loving, nurturing, supposed to be there for their kid, provide food, shelter, joy, and going in, becoming a parent for her, I had no clue how to provide that.
Cómo pensar educarla, cómo educar a un hijo porque pues nosotros nunca, es la primera vez que íbamos a ser padres.
What I think parents should know about home visiting is that you can learn a lot of new things and tips and tricks, how to take care of the baby and what to do, and if you're, stuck in a routine and everything being monotonous, like they give you new resources and new tools how to handle parenthood.
It was nice to have them kind of guiding me. Even though I was not a first-time mom, I felt like a first-time mom.
It totally blew my mind over time. So much information that I had no idea about. She was straightforward when, teaching me this stuff and answered any of my questions. Just a really positive experience.
What I think that parents could benefit with the program is just having someone here for you, especially for first-time parents. It can be very isolating and it can be very lonely, and having the home visitor changes that and it feels very good.
For me, having a home visitor is like having a second mom there.
A lot has changed. I'm definitely more knowledgeable taking care of her, and I know that anytime I need advice or help from somebody, I can just call her.
It's just that little positive nudge to, hey, I'm noticing something, let's find a way how to change it. And she's like, you know what, Amanda, let's pick you up, dust you off, and let's go over to, see about either getting your driver's license or seeing about, going to college, see if we can start something for you.
It's totally worth it. Like, even if you're on the fence at first, you don't feel like having a stranger coming in your house and teaching you about your little one, do it anyway. You get the help that you need. You get professional advice on things you may not know about your child. And the fact that the program has no fees or anything, it's all totally free, is fantastic.
Today's meeting of the Mendocino County Planning Commission of October 5th, 2023. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting of the Planning Commission with participants both in person and digitally. The public may participate digitally in meetings by sending comments to pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.org or orally via telecomment in lieu of personal attendance. All public comment will be made available to the commissioners, staff, and the general public after processing by staff, and can be viewed as attachments to this meeting agenda on the Planning Commission agenda page. To submit, to submit public comments via telecomment, please use the telecomment form found at www.mendocinocounty.org/government/planning-building-services/meeting-agendas. Mr. Clerk, would you please conduct a roll call?
Commissioner Jones.
I'm here.
Commissioner Purnell.
Here?
Commissioner Pollan.
Here.
And that's it.
Okay, great. Do we have determination of legal notice?
Legal notice has been determined on each matter on the agenda.
Great, thank you. We don't have our director here today. Do staff have a report for our director?
Good morning. No director's report. The director is absent today, but I did have a quick announcement. I wanted to introduce you to the newest member of our planning staff, Shelby Miller. She just started with us on Monday as a Planner 1 in our Ukiah office. She comes to us from University of Irvine with a master's degree in urban and regional planning. So I'm sure you will be seeing more of her very soon.
Welcome. Glad to have you on board. I'm seeing fist pumps in the back of the room, so you must be doing good already. All right. Is that all? Great. Thank you very much. All right. Item number 4, matters from the public expression. Members of the public are welcome to address the Planning Commission on items not listed on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is prohibited by law from taking action on matters not on the agenda. Individuals wishing to address the Planning Commission under matters from the public may do so via email or Zoom. For information on each of these methods, call the Planning and Building Department at 707-234-6650 or visit mendocinocounty.org/government/planning-building-services/meeting-agendas. All correspondence will be attached to the item and made available online on the Planning Commission agenda page. If any members of the public logged into Zoom meeting wish to speak under public expression and have not completed the telecomment form, please use the raise hand feature to allow staff to add you to the meeting. Clerk, do we have any requests for telecomment under public expression?
I haven't received any telecomments.
Okay. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
No members of the public on Zoom for telecomment.
All right. Do any members in the audience today wish to speak under public expression? All right, seeing none, we will close public expression. Moving on, agenda item number 5, consent calendar. We have one item on the consent calendar today. It is meeting minutes from the August 3rd, 2023 meeting. Do we have any commissioners who would like any revisions or comments regarding those minutes?
I move approval.
Actually, it should be September 21st.
Okay. Oh, I got a bunk script, huh? Okay.
We thought that was just rolling off your tongue.
It is so easy. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes of September 21st? Is that correct?
So moved.
I'll second.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment on those meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment. Do we need a roll call vote? Yep.
Commissioner Jones.
Yes.
Commissioner Purnell.
Yes.
Vice Chair Pollan.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Great. All right, moving on. Agenda item number 6A, regular calendar. We'll have a presentation from Legal Services of Northern California on issues relating to housing discrimination. May we have that presentation, please?
Good morning. My name is Angelica Millan, and I'm the Managing Attorney of Legal Services of Northern California. I did have a PowerPoint that I submitted to Julia, but I did not see it posted or anything with the materials. Oh, you have it.
I know we got copies. Is it available for?
It is available online
Yeah,
as well.
let me look and see.
Would it be helpful for us to pull it up so you can go through it as you're giving a presentation?
Yes.
Great. I think we can probably manage that. I can't, but. No, I'm not.
So I'll just start again. So again, my name is Angelica Millan, and I'm the Managing Attorney of Legal Services of Northern California's Ukiah Regional Office. And our office serves low-income residents of Mendocino and Lake counties. And one of our practice areas is housing and tenants' rights in particular. It's about more than 60% of our cases are housing or tenants' rights related. And I've been asked to talk today about housing discrimination. And since I'm an attorney, I have to give a disclaimer at the start, of course, and say that even though I'm an attorney, the information I'm giving you today is just general legal information and it's not legal advice. All right, and laws change, so keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So besides this being an action item in the housing element that you can check off the checklist, why talk about housing discrimination? Much of our history in the United States is marked by organized and legalized discrimination. It's something that we often forget. So we're here to take that time to just sit and reflect on that. And this discrimination extends to housing, and it persists today. And discrimination impacts people's daily lives. It impacts their ability to accumulate wealth, pass on generational wealth. It's a social determinant. And exclusion in housing opportunity and barriers to access has created inequities in communities. And again, I say this not because I don't think you already know this, because I think you do. Again, it's just taking the time to pause and reflect on it. And because, again, we have to remember that this has been a historical issue and it has created systemic issues in everything, in all of our systems. And it's hard to undo them. And the frameworks that I'm going to touch on today, these anti-discrimination law framework, is one aspect of creating more equitable communities, but it's not the end all. Next slide, please. So in California, like much of the United States, fair housing, or the concept of being free from discrimination in housing, was controversial. In 1963, California was one of the first states to enact a fair housing law, targeting discrimination in housing through the Rumford Act. However, the following year, an overwhelming majority, 65% of Californians, voted in favor of Proposition 14, which was a proposition spearheaded by the California Realty Association, as it was known then, or California Real Estate Association, to repeal the Rumford Act. So, and they did this under the rhetoric that you all hear about every day when you're making decisions: property rights, free market, the rights to personal freedom, the right to do what you want with your land. That was the rhetoric of Proposition 14. So overwhelmingly, Californians at that time did not want to outlaw discrimination. They wanted a law that said that they could advertise for no Black or Mexican renters. They wanted a law that said that they could restrict their deeds, that they can only sell their property to the race that they chose. However, fortunately, the California Supreme Court rebuffed the California majority and found the Proposition 14 unconstitutional, and it was affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court. It was taken all the way. Next slide, please. So shifting now to current anti-discrimination laws. And again, I'm giving a very broad overview. There are more laws than this. Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, or the Fair Housing Act, as it's most commonly known, and it was passed into law shortly after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. It's the first law where Congress made it illegal to discriminate discriminate in housing by private individuals on the basis of race and other protected characteristics in the sale, rental, financing of housing and other housing-related transactions. And I bring up Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 because we as an office use it a lot, in particular when it comes to subsidized housing, because it provides more protection than the Fair Housing Act does. So we use it a lot, particular with respect to reasonable modifications based on membership in a protected class. The other significant law that we tend to use a lot when it comes to anti-discrimination is the Unruh Civil Rights Act. And again, it protects discrimination by all business establishments, including housing and public accommodations. And again, it's based on protected characteristics, and it's even broader in terms of the protected characteristics than the Fair Employment and Housing Act. Next slide, please. So who is protected? Those are the categories. It's not coming as a surprise. The list has expanded, the most recent being veterans and military status. That was added. And so the Fair Housing Act does not include all of these characteristics. So the Fair Housing Act is like the first column plus gender. The Fair Employment Housing Act is all of these, and then Unruh is all of these, plus like arbitrary discrimination, and specifically also citizenship, age, and immigration. So those are protected characteristics, as well as language for the Unruh. And who is subject to anti-discrimination laws? A lot of people. So all individuals involved in all aspects of housing, including you all, or making land use decisions, all of that. Property owners, we have a lot of, particularly in Ukiah, a lot of residential motels, so they are subject to all these fair housing laws as well. Shelters, housing authorities, all of those folks. Forms of discrimination, and I'm not going to get into the weeds because this is where it gets more legalese, I would say, proving discrimination, and then basically there's intentional discrimination versus no intent, but they're having a discriminatory effect. Making the case of intentional discrimination is hard. We don't see a lot of this type of discrimination. We see more subtle, so discriminatory effect, although we do have a case now where it is intentional discrimination, and we see more intentional discrimination when it relates to reasonable accommodations for disabilities. That's where we see more of the intentional discrimination. People just don't want to believe that that is, the law, providing reasonable accommodations for folks who are disabled. And then basically, I put this up there because we'll discuss, in terms of enforcement, you really need an advocate to enforce these laws. But basically, if there is a discriminatory effect and you prove it, then the burden shifts to the provider to provide what's called a legally sufficient justification. And there's a whole, again, test about how to go about doing that. So again, these laws are not very user-friendly, but these are the laws as they are right now. So what's prohibited? Again, all aspects of housing-related services, refusing to sell to someone because of their religion, for example, evicting someone because they got a dog for their disability and they need that dog for their emotional support in order to be able to use and access their dwelling, just as a non-disabled person would. That's discrimination. Refusing to rent to someone because they have a housing choice voucher. That law is more recent as well, and we are seeing a lot of these cases, and we're going to talk about common issues real quick. But again, these laws just apply to all aspects of housing-related services. Next slide, please. And then again, more examples of prohibited conduct, refusing to make reasonable accommodations, refusing to allow a person to make a reasonable modification to their unit, like installing grab bars in their bathrooms, setting different terms, conditions, or privileges for housing, like imposing fees on persons of a certain race and not doing the same for others. Local government agency like you all making zoning land use decisions or policies that, again, are either intentional discrimination or have a discriminatory effect on these protected classes. And next, good. And these regulations are fairly new, and they kind of just cement what was already existing law, and it describes specific practices that are unlawful in connection with housing opportunities or existing or proposed dwellings. And so if you're making decisions but not providing adequate infrastructure services like water, garbage services in connection with existing housing or proposed housing, if it has a discriminatory effect on a certain protected class, that can be discriminatory. And obviously the obvious, allowing restrictive covenants based on protected classes, and other type of specific practices. They're more detailed even in this regulation. And this is the code, the California Code of Regulations. 12162 is even more specific. So you can't have a policy that requires owners to evict based on a broad definition of nuisance. So other jurisdictions see this like if you have a law that says you have 10 911 calls, in a month, that's too much. You need to declare that a nuisance and you need to evict a tenant. If that has a discriminatory effect on a certain protected class, that's discriminatory. And also practices, I haven't seen this here, practices mandating eviction against tenants like arrested of crimes. These like crime-free policies, mere arrest should not result in these types of policies because they, again, may have a discriminatory effect on certain protected classes. Common issues we see related to discrimination in rental housing, and I've been with legal services here in Ukiah, serving both communities for 20 years. This is 20 years here. Issues have changed and evolved, but again, like refusal to permit reasonable accommodations is like the #1 fair housing issue that we get. And we're seeing a lot more recently too, again, around no-pet policies. And it may not seem like a big deal, but we get unhoused persons who just are not, there's a place available, but they just cannot part with their beloved pet. Well, it's not a pet, right? It's their emotional support animal, and that's the point. And when you have, it's easy to say, on applications, you can't ask a person if they're Black, right? That's clearly discriminatory. If you ask somebody if they have an emotional support animal, you're basically asking them if they're disabled, and that's unlawful. But it's really hard to get at that kind of, to prove that kind of discrimination sometimes, but we see it a lot. And then we're also seeing a lot of source of income discrimination, particularly now, more recently, because we are seeing a lot more funds coming from the government and locally, particularly to homeless assistance. So we are seeing a lot more rejection of applications just because a person is getting rental assistance, and that's discrimination. It's source of income discrimination. And another thing to really get hard at, because we don't have testers, like to see if people are being denied and if it's being based on a protected characteristics. So like we get, they have a voucher, but there's another reason, a pretext, we say. So it's hard to get at discrimination, but we think that there's a lot going on that, but we just don't have the resources like testers to see what is really going on at the initial stage of application. If you have a question, you look.
Yeah, when you say testers, like sending people out into the field to see if they get denied, what do you?
Like we had, we have an intern who made a call one time, and they said they had a voucher, and the landlord said, no, we don't take vouchers. Or they actually didn't say, no, we don't take vouchers. They said they had no available unit. And then we had another intern call a couple of days later looking for a unit. Oh, yeah, we have a unit available. And they didn't have a voucher. So that's like a tester.
I think I have rentals, and I think one of the biggest challenges for me as a landlord is the 20 or 30 people that come when I have an open house and trying to select from them. So I would imagine in that environment, it's pretty difficult to prove discrimination because even for me, just to like pick from that many people, you feel like you're like Sophie and Sophie's Choice. Like, who are you gonna leave without a house still?
Right.
So that just leads me to think that one of the biggest challenges in Mendocino County and California as a whole is just a lack of housing, and that's where we should be focused on.
Right.
Just getting more built.
Yeah, and when it gets built, who does it go to? And are you providing those, like, is the system making sure that everyone is included in that plan, right? Because otherwise, again, we're just going to be promoting a system of exclusion instead of inclusion. So being conscious of those decisions when we're making them. So again, other issues, refusing to allow reasonable modifications, change of rules that displace poor residents. So that's kind of like where we see this a lot in mobile home parks because frankly, there are not enough protections for mobile home park residents, particularly in our counties, because there are no local like rent control protections for mobile home park residents, and there's no statewide rent control protections for mobile home park residents. And so we get like these new corporate owners, and we've been seeing this a lot in the last 4 years, come in and buy these parks and institute increases in rents that are really significant. You know, changing in rules, like saying you have to, like, your mobile home is not up to my standards, like aesthetically, right? And folks that are poor cannot afford those kind of changes. And so they get displaced. We're seeing a lot of that. And then subsidized housing, we see not as much as we did before. National origin as related to language access is not providing adequate translation or interpretation services for folks who are limited English proficient. Because they have additional obligations subsidized housing provider under this other law that I didn't mention, but I'm sure you're familiar with, Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination for recipients of federal funds against NACE in the areas of race and national origin and color. And then we see a lot of our rentals, I don't know about yours, particularly in the larger apartment complexes, there's a lot of dilapidation. And then rehab that results in displacement. And again, you know, folks that are poor tend to live in those units because they have no other alternatives, and they're also living in poor, uninhabitable conditions because they don't really have anywhere else to go. And so again, that comes to what are the policies in code enforcement, what policies are there locally, and it's hard to say that there are many. Next. And then how are the laws enforced? Again, generally the burden of enforcement falls on the victims of discrimination. So if they're being evicted, then they can raise discrimination as an affirmative defense. That's not always ideal because evictions in California are summary proceedings, and so tenants don't have as much opportunity to provide a defense in that type of environment. They can also file a complaint with HUD or the Civil Rights Department. Civil Rights Department used to be known as the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, so now it's known as the Civil Rights Department of California. So HUD enforces the federal fair housing laws. Civil Rights Department of California enforces the state fair housing and civil rights laws. So in both departments or agencies, folks can file complaints online, by phone, or by mail. And their websites actually do have good information on how to go about doing that. The process itself can be kind of convoluted, but it's basically like filing a complaint, then you get called, and there's an investigation, and then there's mediation or conciliation, and then if the department finds cause, and they can take that up, if there's no mediation, and then file a suit. Or a person can also file an affirmative lawsuit themselves without going through any of these agencies. So file a discrimination lawsuit. And then writ of mandamus is basically a type of a lawsuit, generally when we're trying to, usually that applies in like public housing authority situations context. And then again, you will have your local government approval process. So if people are going through the process, there's grievance processes that they can go through as well. Next slide, please, almost done. And then these are the resources to help with housing discrimination issues. So that's us, and I have more contact information about us in our last slide. And then there's the contact information for the California Civil Rights Department. Again, the website is pretty good. And the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, that's just a division of HUD that reviews fair housing complaints. And we're in Region 9 in our county. And then final slide. And that's just information about us. And again, we do more than housing. We do a lot of reentry work. That's for folks who are having barriers to employment or housing because of past criminal records, and then special senior issues, all of those. And some immigration, naturalization, and green card renewals. I think I did it in my time. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission?
I just have a comment, and that is I like to think about it because we're planners from a planning perspective, and I just looked in our inland code for the number of times single family is used in the code, and there's 126 instances of us describing something as a single family residence, which is a type of housing discrimination because you can have more than 2 families live in a residence.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we update our code, I'm looking at our planner, maybe we could think about changing that to primary residence, just because it's a less value-laden term.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I know is that any residential development of 10 units or more, you have to include an ADA unit. And I'm not sure we always look at that when we're, not that we've had very many. I think there's been 2 since I joined the commission, and actually both of them were affordable housing, so I'm sure they did it. But it is something to just be conscious of and make sure that that's included in the project description. Yeah, so thank you for your presentation, very helpful.
Thank you. Have a great day.
One quick question for you too. Have you noticed any change in enforcement since the Tenants' Rights Act of 2019 came into effect?
Not in terms of enforcement. There's been more rights to enforce. So the tenant has to enforce them. So there's definitely been more protections. But because of there are exceptions to that law, like again, for mobile home park, there's an exception. For mobile home owners in mobile home parks, there's an exception. But it's definitely helped in terms of you can't just evict somebody unless there is a good cause. So again, that creates you have to have some justification. And so less ability to discriminate in those types of, I would say, or it's harder for landlords to discriminate on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a public comment from Zoom.
All right, let's take it.
Hello, Commission and the the Legal Services of Northern California presenter. Thank you very much. My name is Amy Wynn. I'm with Wynn Coastal Planning and Biology in Fort Bragg. And, sorry, okay, it says lower my hand. Sorry about that. I have probably a somewhat obscure question or just a comment for the Commission to consider, which is, we have these amazing accessory dwelling unit regulations, which are fantastic. There are some limitations that are posed on them as to size, et cetera, proving some other things. One thing to consider for the inland portion of the county is that before the accessory dwelling unit regulations came along, the inland portion of the county had the second residential unit as a tool, which was not incentive-based coupled with restrictions. So second residential units could be larger than 1,200 square feet. And I think that's, I'm not, something that our team in my company keep thinking about, the planners keep thinking about, it's like, is an accessory dwelling unit exclusive of a second residential unit? Why would the second residential unit as a tool have to go away? In my mind, the accessory dwelling unit tool is an incentive to have property owners give more housing, in that it's an easier planning process. But did that need to displace the second residential unit tool, which allowed for residences larger than 1,200 square feet? That's my comment and question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any members in the room that would like to speak public comment on this item? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the public comment period. All right, moving on. Agenda item number 6B. This is case number U_2023-007 Collins, a major use permit for the short-term rental, provision of room and board of 2 guest rooms in an existing single-family dwelling accessed via a private drive. We're opening the public hearing now. Mr. Clerk, has there been any correspondence or telephone calls received?
The correspondence I did receive was posted to the website.
Great. And I also note for the commission, it's in our packet. It was handed out with us here today. All right, I'd like staff presentation on this item, please.
Good morning, Russ Ford, Senior Planner. So as you mentioned, this is use permit 2023-07, which is an application to allow the legal operation of a short-term rental of 2 guest rooms in an existing single-family dwelling on a private road in Redwood Valley. Property is located in Redwood Valley, about 5.5 miles north of the town center. It's accessed by a private driveway off Rancheria Road. The parcel is currently assessed at 1.62 acres and zoned rural residential, 5-acre minimum. It is improved with a single-family dwelling and several accessory structures. The subject parcel sits at the rear of a previous 3-parcel subdivision and is accessed via an existing easement across 2 front lots at 2308 and 2393 Rancheria Road, 2293, excuse me, Rancheria Road. Under the current model, inland short-term rentals are processed as accessory uses under section 2164.015 for room and board, which allows for the renting of not more than 2 rooms for occupancy by transient guests for compensation or profit. If the parcel does not have frontage on a publicly maintained road, a major use permit is required. The proposed use is consistent with the regulations of the zoning ordinance and general plan with regard to accessory residential uses. However, in order to meet the required use permit findings, some additional conditions will need to be added to the project. So finding A requires the establishment, maintenance, or operation of a use as applied in conformity with the general plan. Subject parcel is classified rural residential. General plan policy allows for accessory uses and defers to the zoning code for details. An accessory residential use is consistent with the general plan, so finding A can be made. Finding B requires that adequate utilities, access road, drainage, and other necessary facilities have been or are being provided. So the site currently has 2 small structures, approximately 120 square feet each, that are evidently being used as semi-residential units in conjunction with short-term rental operation. These units were connected to the existing septic system without permits and so have exceeded the engineered capacity of that system. Staff is recommending condition 4 be added, which requires that environmental health approval be obtained for a connection of the 2 units prior to clearance of a business license. So this condition may be completed either through upgrading the septic system to allow for those 2 unpermitted connections, or removing the septic use from the structures and converting them to storage. Essentially, you're just removing the restrooms. So compliance with condition 4 would allow finding B to be made. Finding C says that such use will not constitute a nuisance or be detrimental to the health, safety, peace, morals, or comfort or general welfare of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of such proposed use, or be detrimental or injurious to the property and improvements in the neighborhood. So one of the issues that has been brought to staff's attention is that guests of the short-term rental units tend to get lost trying to find their way out to it and frequently stop at the neighbor's house for directions. Staff believes that existing signage directing customers is insufficient. Condition 8 requires the applicant to submit a signage plan to resolve these issues prior to clearance of the business license. Signage must comply with both county regulations and CAL FIRE 4290 clearance. Compliance with Condition 8 would allow finding C to be made. Additionally, Condition 9 allows revocation of the permit should the use be conducted in a way that is detrimental to the public health, welfare, or safety, or to be a nuisance. And that's an ongoing condition. And then finally, finding D, that such use preserves the integrity of the zoning district. As discussed previously, room and board is an allowed accessory residential use, so finding D can be made. Staff has determined the project to be categorically exempt from CEQA under Section 15301 for existing facilities. No additional environmental review is required. Staff recommends the Planning Commission by resolution find the project to be categorically exempt and grant approval of the use permit as proposed by the applicant, subject to the conditions of approval in the resolution. That concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Questions from the commission for staff?
You, of course, sorry.
Unmute.
Unmute. I have a couple, of course, sorry. I was wondering if you determined the plot plan is not well drawn and there's no measurements on it, so I can't really tell if the storage units are within this 30-foot setback or not. Did you determine that they are outside of the setback?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I know that the 120 square foot is the limitation for building permits, so if the septic use was removed, then the structures would not actually require building permits. And in some of those situations, the structures that don't require building permits are exempt from setbacks, but I would have to get back to you on that.
Huh, that's very strange. I've never heard of structures being exempt from setbacks that don't need building permits. That's not how we did it in Fort Bragg. So that's the county thing?
I will have to follow up on that.
Okay. So that was one of my questions. And then the other question I have is, was ADA accessibility looked at all? I know, for example, I have many hats. I also run an inn. And as part of that, every time I do any new structure, I have to have an ADA parking space and a EV parking space for every structure because everything has to be ADA accessible. And I was wondering if that was looked at or not.
I believe that would be a condition that would be associated with the business license.
Ah, interesting. So you wouldn't need to figure it out at this stage?
Together with the signage plan and approval from environmental health, that would be something that would have to be dealt with by the applicant prior to the final clearance of the use as the short-term rental.
Okay. And then my last question is the person who manages this Airbnb living on site?
I believe so.
Okay, thanks. No. Sorry.
Commissioner Pronell, do you have any questions?
I do. I had a few. The application mentions that 2 bedrooms will be rented out, but do we know how many bedrooms are in the house total?
The 2 bedrooms would be rented out would have to be in the house for it to fall
so
under those regulations.
So it's only a 2-bedroom house?
The room and board is limited to a maximum of 2 bedrooms, so
Yeah.
regardless of how many are in the house, it's no more than 2 that can be used for the room and board.
Okay, I'm just trying to get an idea of whether or not the entire house will be rented or a portion of the house will be rented.
No, the room and board regulation specifies that no more than 2 bedrooms can be used.
Sure, I'm curious if there's perhaps a 3rd bedroom that the applicant might be living in. Okay, cool. Okay, great. And I'll ask you more questions about it when you come up. And the reason why I was asking that is because in the resolution, item number 4 in the resolution, which is on page 2, per room and board, it's allowing the renting of 2 rooms for transient occupancy with the existing primary residence not superseding the primary residential use of the parcel. And in previous applications, we've accomplished that explicitly by limiting that to 180 days or less, or, which I didn't see here, or it seems like another way to do that is if the home is going to be continuously occupied by the host or the owner, that would make the accessory use a true accessory use. So I was just curious which of those two categories we might be falling into here so that we can actually accomplish number 4 in the resolution.
My understanding is that the property owner lives at the site full time.
Okay, okay. Great, and we can discuss this more, but I'm thinking that we might want to explicitly require in the condition that one of those 2 items that I mentioned earlier be met in order to maintain that true accessory use. We can come back to that in discussion. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
And I had one quick question. I noticed that condition number 5 is that the revocation of a couple building permits. And I'm just curious, will they be issued or canceled? What are those permits? I didn't see that elsewhere.
Those are for the storage structures that are being illegally used as a residential use. Basically, the 120 square foot buildings that have toilets in them.
So there have been permits that have been applied for to legalize those structures, and they either need to be issued or canceled. Is that what I'm reading?
They need to be brought into compliance somehow, and that condition 4 to either upgrade the septic with the buy-off of environmental health or to convert them to non-residential uses should accomplish that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and just for clarification, these are building permit violations. They're not actual permits yet.
I see. Thank you. All right. Well, we now would like to invite the applicant to give a presentation as the applicant in the room. Please come up to the microphone and say your name so that everyone can hear you, and also please speak into the mic so that people that aren't in the room can hear you.
My name's Chester Collins, and I live at 2304 Rancheria Road. It's my house. I have a short, can I give you guys this short piece of paper? 5. It's just, I have an answer for all of the things brought up, and maybe I could go through them real quick. So, yeah, I live at the house. I have a few other roommates from. I'm really lucky to live with a group of people that I really care about, and I do care very much for the neighborhood and the neighbors. But regarding the lack of signs, I will put in the signs with the regulation standards that are needed, and that'd be great for everybody. And regarding the approval from the environmental health, I'm going through the permitting process for the small units that I built, and I didn't, to be honest, I thought they were so small that they didn't need permitting, but regardless, now I know that. And I did build them ADA to all the ADA specs. I have a ramp. Not that that matters. I just thought I'd bring it up, and I'd be interested in the parking. Learning more about that, how to make that happen. But I'm at the point where environmental health has said we're working with Sam Pope Engineering and Environmental Health, and I need to. I would like to respond to each issue, but I don't want to bore everyone. But of course, like the dogs that we're complaining about are my roommates, and it's actually her. I don't know, it's a really important dog to her. And sometimes when she leaves, it howls a little bit, but we can figure that out. And then I have a dog that has roamed up on my neighbor's property, but these aren't Airbnb. This has nothing to do with the Airbnb guests. In fact, I'm always present at the house, except when I'm working. And, there's never been an issue with any of the guests. Yeah, and I don't know. I think it actually reduces the traffic to have the Airbnb because it's rarely, it's never full. So I don't know if that answers all the questions, but that's my response.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Questions from the commissioner for the applicant? I guess I have one question from looking at the aerial view of your property. It looks like you had a significant cultivation activity on the property in the past. Is that still going on?
Yeah, that was maybe 5. I have a few medical cannabis plants, but the county's come by and approved it. There's not anything like that.
Okay.
But back then, I could afford to be on my own without roommates. I just can't anymore.
That's it. Commissioner Pronell?
Thank you. I just want to get your help in kind of rounding out the picture at your place. So you have a house.
Yes.
And you have roommates.
Yes.
And how many bedrooms are in the house?
There's 3 official bedrooms, but it's a much bigger house than that. There's really 4. It just doesn't have a closet.
Okay.
I have a couple that live in one of the rooms, and Marcella lives upstairs. I live in another, and Casey lives in another. I know that sounds like a lot of people.
No, people live all kinds of different
Okay.
ways, so we're not here to judge that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get an idea of, for the 2 rooms that you're allowed to rent out under this use permit, will those be rooms in the house, or they'll be rooms in the house?
They can be rooms in the house, and it's just right now we're, like they said, the permitting isn't finished on the other spaces, but there's people living there.
Okay.
Right now.
And then, so basically it would be 2 rooms in the house, but there would be full-time residents in the house in addition to the transient occupants.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that. And that's significant for us because that makes the room and board, the transient occupancy, a true accessory use to the primary use, which is long-term residency of folks there. So thank you for bearing with me while we kind of establish that. It sounds like you're addressing the issues with environmental health, so that's great that you've got a solution moving forward. I'm just going through my notes here to see if there's anything else. Oh, due to the concerns of the neighbors, I was curious if the commission did choose to add some conditions that would limit check-in and check-out hours and specify that parking was only limited to the property. Would that be agreeable?
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. Great. That's all I've got for you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
don't have any questions for you right now, so we're going to close the applicant's presentation. Thank you very much. And now we'll be moving to public comment. The commission will now hear public comment on this item. The commission will start with public comments in the room and then hear from telecommenters that are connected virtually via Zoom. When called to speak, please state your name for the record. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person. Speakers are asked to please address their comments to the meeting chair and refrain from using profanity or engaging in conversation with members of the audience or staff. Are there members of the public in the room that would like to speak on this item? Please come up to the lectern and state your name for the record, sir.
Dennis McLean. I live at 2308 Rancheria Road. We've been there since I retired from the Navy 34 long years ago. Always been a nice, peaceful neighborhood. Was previously a dirt road, and about 30 years ago I had it graded and chip sealed. And it's been slowly deteriorating since then. Approximately 80% of the traffic now is from Mr. Collins' house. Some of them don't really respect the safety of the neighbors when they're entering and exiting at high speeds. It's a little discerning. That's my main concern with this operation. Another concern, as a former business owner, I always assumed you had to get your permits and licenses before
I'm sorry, could you pull the mic towards you? I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you.
As a former business owner, I always assumed that you were required to have permits and licenses prior to starting a business. This has been going on for 1.5 years, and I don't think he would have applied for a permit without our complaints. Mr. Nunemaker couldn't make the meeting today. He's the other neighbor. He not only has to put up with the traffic, but he's put up with the noise and the parking on his property. And he agrees with us that we strongly recommend that you deny this permit. We now have a brand-new motel out in the valley. I think it'd be a much more suitable location for Mr. Collins' guests. That's it.
Thank you for your comments.
Any questions?
Any other comments in the room? Do we have any comments via Zoom?
No public comment on Zoom.
Okay. And did we didn't receive any other requests for telecomment? Okay, great. Then I'll close the public comment on this item. Staff, do you have any final remarks?
Yeah, just to follow up with Commissioner Jones's question, I'm not seeing an exception for buildings that don't require permits to be exempt from setbacks. So I believe that they would need to meet the setbacks, yes.
And were you able, I mean, I tried to look on Google Earth to try, and I can't see where the buildings are, so I have no idea, no way of figuring out if they comply with setbacks.
No, I'm sorry, I wasn't on the site view. I'm not sure where they are.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any final remarks from the applicant?
Just following up on Commissioner Jones's question, wouldn't the setbacks be reviewed by planning and building through the permit process?
Yes, but buildings that were less than 120 square feet don't require permits.
But you still have to comply with setbacks.
But you still have to comply with setbacks. So who's going to be looking at the setbacks then? Does anybody look at setbacks?
It's a complaint-driven thing, so if someone builds something within the setback and it's not permitted, then they're obligated to tear it out if a neighbor complains.
The county, I feel like the permitting process deals with that, and even though it's small, I'm getting them permitted right now, and the planning department has we're working through, all those things.
Do you know if the buildings are within 30 feet of your property line?
They're near the property line.
Do you know if they comply with the setback?
I don't know all those particular things, but I'm giving all that information to the building planning, and we're working on so far they've approved the plot plan, that everything through. I don't know the particulars of all the rules. But so far.
Okay, thank you.
So it looks like the setbacks would be 20 feet all the way around. If that's something the commission would like to follow up on, we could continue and bring this back at another date.
I mean, I guess we could continue. Is there any way that we could condition approval based on it being in compliance with the setbacks?
Well, before we even go there, maybe we should do a straw vote and see if we have 3 commissioners to approve of this.
I could be ready to approve this today, but with some additional conditions.
Yeah, I feel similarly.
I feel challenged by this project because it's pretty clear to me that 4 rooms could easily be rented. I also feel that calling one a yoga studio and one a room is just a way of skirting the regs at the county, and that they're actually both can be rented as vacation rentals. It's a private road. We have both other property owners on that private road already experiencing significant impacts and complaining about this use, and that's why you do a use permit process. So I would actually be inclined to deny this permit.
Question for County Council. Do we need a majority of all commissioners or a majority of the quorum present today to approve this?
Deputy County Council Matthew Gadrowski, let me check that. This isn't going to the board, so I want to confirm what the bylaws have for that.
Okay, thank you.
In the past, we've needed a majority of all commissioners to approve because we ran into this already.
And while Deputy County Counsel is looking, we can continue our discussion. Commissioner Jones, if we were, I mean, I feel like with these conditions, we kind of always run into wanting to set the rules, so to speak, with the conditions, but then also realizing that there is not a tremendous amount of oversight from the county on meeting those conditions, and that is not unique to this application at all. It's just the way things are. So it kind of leaves it on the neighbors, really, to have that oversight. And again, not ideal, and not unique to this application. But I feel like that's kind of the best we can do if we do approve these projects, is to condition them to the best of our ability. So all of that to say, if we were to get conditions on check-in, check-out hours, parking, quiet hours, and only 2 rooms to be rented, is that something that you could consider, or are you feeling set on denial?
Love the way you phrase that.
Trying my best.
Yeah. It's bugging me that these microphones are interfering with my ability to see your face. I guess the first thing for me is not knowing whether or not these accessory buildings comply with setbacks is kind of key. And looking at the drawing, it certainly appears that they do not. And if that is the case, then I'm afraid to say it, but the property owner is likely going to have to tear them down, especially if the neighbor complains about them, because then they would be against the code. And I just see it very easily becoming a situation where you have 4 rentals here instead of 2. I mean, I do appreciate that you live there, because for me that is important. So that I do appreciate. If you really wanted to go forward today with this, and we're going to twist my arm to change my mind, I would be inclined to require that those units, those 2 little buildings, remain as storage buildings, and that we condition the permit to deny improvements as bedrooms, and that if they're within the setback, they get demolished. I guess I might be able to see that way, but that just mitigates a little bit the impacts on the neighbors, because then you don't have 4 rooms that could potentially be getting rented out. I mean, I understand the Wild West nature of Mendocino County, because I grew up here, living in a non-code house, so I get that. And I just think that, use permits for a reason. And if he was a good actor, we wouldn't have neighbors complaining about it.
So it sounds like a key issue for you is determining whether or not this meets the 20-foot setbacks.
30-foot setbacks.
Thought we heard 20.
I looked it up in the code, it says 30.
For parcels that are less than 5 acres for R5, there's a setback exception to 20 feet also.
Okay, an exception. Okay.
I didn't catch that. I was looking it up really quickly because I was curious.
Okay. Yeah, so that's information we do not have today.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, if that information was available, I mean, I guess the question is, if we're going to, well, our first question is to Deputy County Counsel. Do we get the determination on what our voting threshold is for today?
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski. So the bylaws read, as revised in May, which is fairly recently, for quorums, that an affirmative vote of majority of the membership is required for action on items which require a report and recommendation to the board. So that would be your general plan amendments and your zoning code amendments and rezonings. For all other items, including procedural motions, an affirmative vote of a majority of the quorum shall be required for action. So for a use permit, it could be a 2-1 vote would be an approval. If the commission wants to see more, give direction to staff in any event to come back with more information on structures or more revised conditions of approval, we could still continue it to a date certain and come back with that.
Any inclination from my fellow commissioners in which direction you would like to zig?
Well, I get the feeling you guys are both for it, so if that's the case, then I think we should zig and at least find out if these structures are conforming to setbacks or not. before we potentially approve a permit that includes a condition to legalize them. That seems basic to me. And then I would just say the other side of this to me is I have no doubt that these structures will continue to be rented out as Airbnbs. And so you guys need to be conscious of the fact that there's going to be 4 rooms getting rented here, just because of the past experience of this property owner.
Well, I would be fine continuing this so that we can add conditions, because I think there's a number of conditions that need to be added, and it'll take staff a little bit of time to do that. And then hopefully we can learn more about whether or not this meets the setbacks. I mean, I'll just say that I hope you meet the setbacks, and I hope there's a way to condition this so that you can run a legitimate business off the property. It's a small property. There are neighbors there, so our job is to balance the nuisances and balance it within the zoning district. And so that's the job that we have to do here today. So when we're looking at how close this stuff is to the property line, it actually really matters. I'm hopeful there's a way that you can do this, but I don't think we have all the information that we need today, and we certainly don't have all the conditions written.
Maybe one of the things we might consider doing, if we're going to continue it and come back, is for us to go through and just give staff an idea of what our concerns are, that then they could maybe not necessarily craft conditions, because I know you can do that, but then maybe you could just craft conditions to address those concerns. Does that make sense? Okay, so 2 concerns that I have are the dog issue, and maybe one of the conditions would be to fence the property. And then the second condition that I have, that I'm concerned about, is that only 2 rooms be rented, and that includes those structures, whether you call them rooms or yoga studios. If they're getting rented as Airbnbs, they count as 2 of the total. So those would be key to me.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear what you're asking about, how you would address that concern with those units.
So what I'm saying is he's got a 4-bedroom house and 2 units that he currently rents, 2 outdoor units that he rents as Airbnbs. When Commissioner Parnell was questioning him about how he was going to rent out the rooms in his house, he said he was going to rent out 2 of the rooms in his house as the Airbnb component. So since he currently rents out the 2 outdoor rooms, and I don't know what else he's renting out in his house as Airbnb components, but we know those 2 are, and he's going to rent out the 2 inside. To me, it's kind of obvious that it could easily creep to 4 at some point, if not right away. And so I'm trying to keep us on track with what the zoning regulation requires, and that it's only 2 rooms. So make it clear that those 2 outdoor rooms, or whichever 2, maybe like one good thing would actually be have a site plan that's to scale would be nice, and to designate within that site plan what's getting used for what. And then as that becomes part of the record for the property that's approved, that's the way those things get used in the future. And if they're not getting used that way, then that's a violation of the permit. So like that kind of ambiguity to me, Cliff, leads people to feel like they can push the envelope when there's already impacts on the neighbors from the significant traffic that's already happening from the business. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I'm not, I think you're right on. I'm just wanting to be clear about what it is, what conditions could be placed on this that would ameliorate that concern of renting out. And I guess you're saying that if there were designated spaces that said these are the spaces that could be utilized for short-term rentals, that would address it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yep. So, clear language about which spaces are available and the number of. And then I would add to that a limit on check-in and check-out hours. I don't know if we've done that before, but I just want to address the neighbors' concerns. It may be that the comings and goings are related to the full-time residents, but at least we can be sure by conditioning this that we've done what we can do to, limit any nuisance related to the short-term rental. Similarly, limit parking to the property itself. And then I believe we've added a condition for quiet hours in the past for short-term rentals. So
We have.
hopefully we can just copy and paste that language. Additionally, and this would be on the tails of what Commissioner Jones wanted to see, I think we need to be more explicit in a condition that specifies how the room and board use will remain an accessory use. And again, language that we've used on past applications are either less than 180 days per year, or provided that there's continuous long-term occupancy of the home,
which he has.
would satisfy me.
Right.
And it sounds like that is in fact what is happening, but we have not made that a condition.
Good point.
So I feel like we've given direction to staff, and so we're going to move to continue this to a date certain. Do we have a date certain on the calendar that we can schedule this for?
Stand by. We'll see if we can find one.
Standing by.
Standing by.
November 2nd. How about Thursday, November 2nd?
Okay. We don't need a roll call vote to continue this, do we? We do. Okay, great. Well, I'd invite a motion to continue this to a date certain of November 2nd. Is that? Thank you.
So moved.
Second?
All right, any further discussion?
Nope.
All right, I'll invite a vote.
It's busy.
Commissioner Purnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Vice Chair Paulin.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you everyone for your time. All right, moving on to agenda item number 6C of the regular calendar, we'll have a presentation and discussion regarding vehicle miles traveled and associated review procedures. We have staff presentation, please.
Russ Ford, Senior Planner. That item has actually been pulled from the agenda. There was just a recent update from MCOG about kind of a change in the model for VMTs. So staff requested time to incorporate that into the presentation.
Oh, fair.
All right. Gonna let him off the hook that easy?
Sure.
All right. Well then, let's moving on. Agenda item number 7, matters from staff. Are there any additional matters from staff today?
Nothing today, thank you.
Great, thank you. Then agenda item number 8, matters from the commission. Commissioners, any items for today?
I do have one, and it's a little bit of a weird one. So, and I'm not sure exactly how to present this, but I've been getting a lot of complaints on the coast that the building permit approval process is taking much longer than is quoted when they bring it in. So people are told it'll be 5 to 6 weeks, and instead it's 3 to 4 months. And recognizing that your building officials are busy, I'm not asking people to work harder, but maybe if there's a way that when people bring the permit in, it can be communicated that it's actually going to be 4 to 5 months instead of 4 weeks, because I know contractors are trying to schedule multiple different jobs, and I've heard from a number of people, they're just frustrated, and so I just want to pass that on. Maybe more truth in advertising is what I'm asking for.
Can't argue with that. All right. Any other matters from the commission? Okay, great. Well, then I will move to agenda item number 9, adjournment. I'll invite a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you
you.
back here next time.
Good job.